Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to walk you through the exact process that I have used for the last 10 years to do strategic planning for my professional and personal life. My name is Sean Johnson. I'm a professor at Kellogg at Northwestern University. For 12 years I'm the founding partner of Manifold, a venture holding company in Chicago. It struck me 10 years ago or so that smart companies are very, very disciplined about doing strategic planning at the end of the year. It gives their team a lot of clarity. It gives their team momentum kind of coming into the new year. And I realized that I might benefit from doing something similar kind of in my personal life. And so, you could equate it to kind of a goal setting process or like a resolution process, but I think as you're going to see, it's a lot more detailed, but it just gives me a tremendous amount of clarity. And in some senses, my entire year is largely planned when I hit January. And so I'm able to hit the ground running with a lot of clarity and a lot of momentum. And so that's going to be what I'm going to walk you through. Take whatever you think is valuable from it, leave what you think is not. But this is a process that I've evolved and iterated on over the years. It did not start this way, it did not start this complicated, and it only became that way over time as I developed the habit and as I picked things that benefited and purged things that didn't. And this is the process that works for me right now. So actually the first thing that I like to do is reflect back on the previous year and where I've come, lessons I've learned, accomplishments that I've had. It allows me to feel a sense of gratitude. Again, accomplishments, experiences that I've had with my family, with friends, and it allows me to start from a place of gratitude where my bucket kind of feels full rather than starting from a place of kind of anxiety or stress. And so not just list the things that have worked or that went well, but feel appreciation for them. The second thing that I feel like this gives me is perspective. There's a saying that you grossly overestimate what you can get done in a day and you grossly underestimate what you can get done in a year. Sometimes can be demoralized if you have an ineffective day or an ineffective week, but when you look back and you're like, wow, compared to last year, I got a lot done. It's really, really powerful. Once you start implementing a process like this, it's going to be easier to do because you're going to be able to kind of compare and contrast. Look at what you set out for yourself at the beginning of the year and then compare it to what you actually got done. But even without that, I think that you can still start this process now just by thinking back to what your life was like this time last year. What were you doing professionally? What was your personal life like? What was your personal health like? What was the state of your soul? Compare that to where you are now. One last note here, don't use this as an opportunity to beat yourself over the head. Like, again, we want to operate from a place of abundance rather than a place of fear. And don't start this process by all the ways in which you failed to hit your goals. In fact, I would assume that you're gonna not hit your goals. I like to use the framework from John Doerr, who is Kleiner Perkins, was the creator of, or not the creator, but he popularized OKRs. He sets a goal of having his team accomplish 70% of the things that they set out. If they accomplish all of them, he believes that their goals weren't big enough. But if they're harder than that, then maybe they were too hard. And so he's found that 70% is kind of that sweet spot. Give yourself grace, especially this year, because you maybe didn't write anything down. Celebrate the things that you did. Maybe ask yourself about lessons, but then move on. Next, I want you to list out your values. Donald Miller wrote a great book 15 years ago now called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And he basically argues that our lives are like stories. And good lives tell good stories. I really like that metaphor, and I think of values as kind of the theme of the story. Like, what is this story about? I think values are also helpful because they can help frame action if you choose to do them. A value is not something that lives in your head, ultimately. A value manifests itself in the actions that you take. That's how you know that you believe it. If you do things that are contrary to your values with regularity, it begs the question, like, is that actually a value of yours? People are often tempted when they do this process to choose values that they think other people would want for them to have or that they think that they should have, and I would admonish you to avoid that. Values that you think you should have but that you don't actually have are not going to be sufficiently compelling. And while you might be able to argue that there's some sort of continuum of goodness when it comes to values, I'm willing to bet that the values that you're going to choose are probably good things. Choose values that you actually do believe and that you think will be sufficiently compelling for you to take action based upon. I also would encourage you to use really strong language when you write down your values. I had an old mentor that used to tell me that words, when used correctly, are like sledgehammers, and that they have a tremendous amount of power behind them. And so I want you to use words to your advantage and take opportunities to kind of take language and pump those things up. So just an example for you to kind of help frame this. My mission is to help people build intentional businesses and live intentional lives. And the values that I write down are, I want to be family first, and I try to add color to that. So you can see here, if you build a great company, but you don't know your kids, then you failed. Be a great husband and a great dad first. Similarly, create stories. That's kind of, again, a riff on the Donald Miller idea. Life is more meaningful when you have a lot of adventure and a lot of novelty and deep connection with other people. And so I try to create the conditions to make that happen. And then everything can be made better. And this comes from a belief that the things that we do in this life actually do matter, and that everything that's worth doing is worth doing well. And so I ask myself, like, what would make this camping trip, or what would make this dinner amazing, and then go do that. So identify your values. I think 3 is generally a really good number. Make them ones that you are in a true alignment with, and use language to your advantage to kind of punch them up. The next step is to create compelling scenes. And so if a great life is about telling great stories tend to have memorable scenes in them. And so we have it within our power to try to deliberately construct those scenes if we really think about it. There's a growing body of research that suggests that our perception of time actually slows down when we are in the midst of what I would call a memorable scene. Think about a weekend where maybe you were scrolling Instagram or doing chores, and compare that to a trip that you took, or compare that to a 3-hour dinner that you had with friends. I would imagine the dinner sticks out in your memory much more so than that night that you were scrolling your Instagram feed and you wake up 6 hours later and you're like, I didn't get anything done this week. And so I want you to try to deliberately construct those kinds of scenes and try to fold as many of them as you can into your life. Thinking about those ideas of novelty, surprise, connection, serendipity, those are some of the elements that can kind of create more memorable scenes. So now we're in a place where we can create our goals. We're going to take our vision, we're going to take some of those stories, we're going to try to translate them into things that are kind of concrete. And there's lots of different approaches for doing this. You know, some people tell you that there's lots of different buckets. I tend to think that people actually have pretty similar buckets for the most part. And so that's going to be what I'm going to show you here. So my buckets look like this. As you can see, I got mind, body, soul, husband, dad, friend, family member, work, and finance. And then for each one of these things, I try to identify 3 to 5 goals, again, that are consistent with my values, that will ideally progress me toward my life vision, and I can talk more about that later. These goals, as much as possible, are specific, measurable, and things that you can actually control or strongly influence the outcome of. So again, identify 3 to 5 for each one of those buckets. Some of those buckets might not be relevant to you. Some buckets might be relevant that aren't in here, and that's totally fine. These are your goals, not mine. But take a stab at kind of writing down 3 to 5 of those things. The next step is to make these things real. So if I just write down goals, but I don't do a little bit of extra work to make them concrete, it is unlikely that I'm going to follow through on them. And so when people talk about like New Year's resolutions and how they don't actually get them accomplished, I think this is probably why. And so there's a couple of things that I do here. The first one is I ask, is this a project? I'm using the term pretty loosely. I'm using it from David Allen, who wrote Getting Things Done. Projects are anything that have more than one step to complete. And so by that definition, there's a lot of them, right? Many of these goals actually are projects. And so when there is a project, I try to go in there and I do a couple of things. One, identify the outcome. So I ask myself, what does done mean? So hopefully the creation of the goal itself or the wording of the goal itself indicates what that outcome is. But if not, consider rewriting it until it does. Second, I put in a project plan. And so a project plan doesn't need to be incredibly detailed, but at a minimum, you want to identify the next physical action that you can take to move it forward. And sometimes that's easy. If I want to do a solitude retreat, for example, maybe the first step would be to find some potential dates. Another might be to research places to go and so on. But other projects are a lot more involved, right? So like I want to write a second book. That involves dozens of steps. For each project, I go through here and I try my best to make it into a lightweight project plan. And again, don't spend too much time on this. It's not, you don't need to be comprehensive. You just need to put enough meat on it so that when it's time to kind of move on it, you have sufficient momentum because you know what the next action is, the next thing that you need to do to kind of make things happen. The next one is to ask, is this a habit? A lot of my body goals, for example, actually would fit into this bucket because while I do have an outcome there, I want to do a floor press of 210 pounds or whatever it is. Really, it's a function of committing to an exercise plan, maybe a nutrition plan, that kind of thing. And so a lot of those are actually habit related. For habits, a couple of things I think are really helpful. First, I block it out in the calendar in advance at an appropriate cadence, because if I don't make conscious decisions about when those things are going to happen, I think I'm a lot less likely to do them. There is a gotcha there. You're going to need to move things around, especially for habits. Habits are hard to form, and so you're not going to necessarily get it done every single day. In my opinion, that's okay. I think you just give yourself grace, you dust yourself off, you try again the next day. That's my view on it. But I think it's more important for me to have the trigger in the form of my calendar than if I don't put it on my calendar and I try to remind myself to remember it. Secondly, I get accountability when necessary, right? The idea here is that it's easier to do goals that involve another person. So date night is an easy one that involves your partner, for example. My personal trainer, I don't think I would have hit any of my strength goals or training goals if I had not been working with him. And then the last one is ask yourself, could this be a system? Because systems are repeatable and can be automated or delegated and are really, really powerful and can free you up to focus on other things. This reduces cognitive load. It makes more likely that it's going to happen. There's a ton of benefits to systems thinking and trying to kind of apply that to your own life. So some examples that might be helpful. Any kind of financial goal, let's say you have a savings goal for the year. Take your paycheck, you divide it into the number of pay periods that you have, and then you just set up an automated transaction to get that money out of the account before you have a chance to spend it. A huge one for us when we first had our kids was having, we wanted to have a weekly date night. That was really important to us. So we actually hired a sitter. We told them, come every single Wednesday, no matter what. That was huge for us because, especially in the beginning, like you're tired, you're dealing with young children. Sometimes she would show up and we had completely forgotten about it, but we're like, well, I guess we gotta go out. And so we would throw on our jackets and we would go and have a date anyway. So we've written down our goals. The next step is to try to understand your rhythms. And what do I mean by that? I believe humans are kind of wired for rhythm. I think that we have a daily rhythm of energy, of wakefulness and rest. Many cultures have liturgical calendars or season, like they have periods of intense activity and periods of relative rest relative to the harvest or whatever it is. And so there's seasonal rhythms. Your company probably has rhythms. There's periods where, for example, like investors, if you're raising a venture fund, investors are pretty much checked out in August and for big chunks of December. And so you're not going to be doing much fundraising during those times. I believe we function best when we submit ourselves, we identify natural rhythms and external rhythms, and then we submit ourselves to those and use that for planning purposes. So I want you to think about your day, your week, your month, your quarter, your year, and think about kind of the seasons. There might be periods where you have more activity or less. There might be periods where it's more likely you're going to get something done than otherwise. Try to fit that stuff into the rhythms of your life as much as you possibly can. So look at your week and ask yourself, what you would think you could realistically get done during the week, during the month, during the quarter, during the year. Try to be realistic, but also be creative. So that there are other things you need to get done at your house, chores and things like that, but maybe you decided through this process you want to double down on experiences. If you leave all of your housework and all of those things to the weekend, it's probably going to be less likely that you're going to have as many experiences. And so maybe you make a decision, what if I front load a lot of the things that I historically have done on the weekends, and then I enter the weekend with a more free schedule that would allow me to kind of architect those kinds of experiences. Maybe you could go on more overnight trips or do a staycation downtown or whatever it is, because the groceries are bought, the meals are planned for the week, the laundry's folded, all of that kind of stuff. So be creative when looking at your schedule and ask yourself, what would be the optimal schedule that is realistic based on the actual demands of our life, but would make it most likely that I get my goals done and accomplish and have the kinds of experiences that I'm wanting to have. And then the last step is to pre-book yourself. So armed with all of this information, we now go into our calendar, we hold up our goals and our calendar, and we start slotting things in. So if it's a habit, you actually block out, when do I think that's going to happen? Put it on the calendar. If you have trips that you're going to take, plan them in advance and block them into the calendar. For projects or major kinds of initiatives, I think it's really helpful to think about how big is this project, how long is it realistically going to take, break that into pieces and try to figure out what you're going to try to do. That way you don't wake up and it's October and you have a project that realistically was going to take you 9 months to do, and you have no shot of realistically doing it, right? Think about it like training for a marathon. Nobody would sign up for a marathon and then not do any of the work necessary. They realize there's going to be a lot of pain if they show up to the marathon not having trained at all. And so reverse engineer it, identify your outcome, try to have a project plan that is detailed enough that you have a sense of kind of what the broad contours of it will be and how long it'll roughly take, and then block those kind of milestones into your calendar in advance so that you have some intermediate goals along the way. You might find when you go through this process that you set too many goals, and if you did, that's okay. Just ask yourself, what are goals that must happen this year versus ones that I could theoretically punt. Keep your values in mind as you're doing this. You don't want to keep all of the work goals and push all of the other things. So try to add, that you'll be a one-dimensional person that way. So be honest with yourself about that. But you might find that you need to renegotiate a work commitment with your boss or something like that. And then you've got all of this. The last step is to create what I call an operating cadence. And this is basically checking in and just seeing how things are going. Again, those initial project plans are not going to be comprehensive. As the year unfolds, things are going to change. You're going to learn and need to make adjustments. So this check-in process is a way for you to kind of make course corrections. Again, be proud of yourself for the progress that you've made. Make any adjustments that you need to be making. This does not have to be difficult or onerous. You could block out an hour a month. I have a weekly review process. I make this a part of that, and then I do a real quick scan, and then once a month I step up a little bit to a higher elevation. But you can get this done probably in about an hour. Celebrate the wins, update the status, reprioritize or deprioritize things based on what you've learned. Ask if there's anything that you've learned that you can now apply to your goals going forward. But the idea here is just that what gets measured gets managed. Now, I admit that this probably looks like a tremendous amount of work, but I found that you can get this done in one evening. And it allows you, again, to enter the new year with a tremendous amount of clarity, with a tremendous amount of momentum, with a lot of anticipation because you have thought about experiences and things that you have to look forward to. I end the year with a lot of gratitude about what I've accomplished and a lot of excitement about what's to come. So give it a try. Let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. If you have improvements to this process, let me know that as well. But hopefully you found this valuable. Thanks so much for listening. And don't hesitate to reach out for questions.